All right, so this is the creating arguments video. And what I want to do in this video is I want to take you through why creating arguments is a central component of my course and what it takes to create a good argument. And that will include an overview of the course rubric. All right, so why is it important? Why is it a central component of my course? The reason is because creating an argument is a skill which students in this day and age are often deficient at. And it's a skill that many people coming out of college lack. And it's also a skill that employers very much value. Your ability to speak well, your ability to write well, your ability to get your point across is something that is going to be valuable to you. And that's true regardless of whatever field you enter to, whether it be education or nursing or law enforcement. Whatever field you enter, being able to create an argument, being able to make your point, being able to convince others of your position is going to be immensely beneficial to you. And it's also true that in most courses, you're going to forget a lot of the details of what you learn. But creating an argument is a skill that can last the rest of your life, and it will be beneficial to you for the rest of your life. And that's why I stress it, that's why we're going to work on it, and that's why it's a central component of my course. Okay, so what does it mean to create a good argument? So I've given you the sheet. It's in your reading packet. You'll be given the sheet back every time you write a short assignment. And the purpose of the sheets is to give you as much detailed and specific information and feedback as possible. I want you to know specifically what you're doing well and what you're doing poorly, because then you can continue to do what you're doing well, and you can improve upon what you're struggling with. You can improve upon what you're struggling with by going back and watching a video like this, by going back and reviewing the rubrics and the explanation for the rubrics. And most importantly, you can improve by coming and talking to me during office hours. Okay, so how are you being graded? What are you being graded on? I broke the sheet down into a number of different major components. So thesis, transitions, citations, objections, and rebuttals, and accuracy of information, and length. Okay, so within these first four categories, they're then broken down into four further subsets. And I'm going to talk about those subsets as we go further in the video, but essentially, again, the point is to show you exactly what you're doing well and what you're struggling with. Maybe you're really good at writing objections, but you're not so good at writing rebuttals. This sheet will tell you that, and you can use it to improve. Below this grade is creativity, phrasing and grammar, lateness, plagiarism, and then extra credit. And those are components where you can earn extra credits, you can earn additional points, or you could lose points. Your final grade is an average of your major grading components, and then the pluses or minuses from those categories below the final grade. All right, so let's start off with thesis. The thesis statement is the most important component of your thesis. It is absolutely critical to creating good arguments. If you don't have a good thesis, it is very, very difficult to write a good argument, perhaps impossible. The reason it's so important is because everything follows from the thesis. If you have a good, strong, specific thesis, it becomes easier to make transitions because you know how your ideas are supposed to relate to each other. You can tell whether the ideas are related to the thesis or whether they're not. And if they're not, they should be thrown out. When you have a good, strong thesis, it is easier to identify relevant and irrelevant citations. And when you have a good, strong thesis, you can make an objection to that thesis, specifically to the thesis. All right, so what makes a good thesis? Well, first and foremost, does your essay actually have a thesis? Is there a point? Is there a goal? Is there a purpose? Is there an aim? All those are just words for a thesis statement. Are you trying to accomplish something? And second, is it evident to the reader or the viewer that you are in fact trying to accomplish something? Maybe you think you have a point or your goal or aim, but is it clear to the reader? And if you struggle with this idea that there's only one major argument you developed, or you struggle with this kind of component, it could also be because the argument is made as a fact, not an argument, then that could be a reason why you struggle in your thesis. I highly, 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 highly very highly recommend that you use the phrase, "In this essay, I will go on to accomplish this. I will prove this. I will argue this." The phrase, "In this essay, I will," is really important because it makes it clear for both yourself and the reader or viewer what the point is. By using that phrase, it forces you to say, okay, here's really what I'm trying to argue, as opposed to having a bunch of different ideas and no central idea. So use that phrase. That phrase will help you, and it will help the reader and the viewer. Okay, the second component: was the essay nuanced? Nuanced just means that you go beyond the obvious and the superficial. Nuanced means that you get into details. So nuance means that you don't simply say, here's what I want to do, but then you can state specifically, here's what I want to do. Here's the reason, you might think about it, as to why I'm going to try to make this point. So for example, I might argue, in this essay I will argue that rugby is an excellent sport. It's okay, it's good, it's kind of a general statement. But if you want to get more specific, if you want to get more nuanced, give a reason for why you are making that argument. You might say, rugby is an excellent sport because it combines contact with intellect and fast pace of play. That is a specific thesis statement. And that is good because then you're really focused just on those elements of play. Another good way to kind of ask yourself whether you have a nuanced thesis statement is your thesis statement so specific that it feels like you won't be able to write 2 pages on it or make a 6 or 7 minute video. It should feel too narrow. It should feel like you should feel like at first, I'm not going to be able to get to the length requirement. And the reason that is good is because that forces you to get into detail and real specifics with the rest of your argument. It forces you to think more deeply about what you're trying to accomplish. And thinking more deeply is a component of a good essay. Okay, only one major argument to be developed. Again, this is an important component of a thesis statement. You might have a bunch of great ideas, but if it's not clear what your focus is, it's not clear that you have a thesis statement, and you certainly haven't accomplished this only having one major argument. So for example, you might say, rugby is an excellent sport, or rugby is better than swimming, or rugby has improved throughout the 20th century, or you might say, sports in general are better in the 21st century than the 20th, or contact sports are better than non-contact sports. And you may have a bunch of these ideas, and you may throw them in the first paragraph, and the reader or viewer is saying, okay, what's the point here? What is the real point of this essay? Again, that's where the phrase, in this essay I will, can help you. It can help you identify what specifically you want to argue. And then finally, is your thesis an argument, not a description or a statement of fact? If you're simply stating a fact, then there's no reason to make an argument. There's no reason to raise an objection. There's no reason to really offer evidence because you're simply saying, this is a fact. This is what occurs. So make sure it's an argument. Okay, the second component, major component of your grade is going to be based on transitions. And transitions really just mean, are the ideas flowing together? I often describe it, think of yourself as a guide, guiding someone down a river, as opposed to an explorer where you're trying to figure out, okay, where am I going? What am I trying to do? Where does this path lead? Instead of explorer, in this case, be a guide. Show your reader, show your viewer how the ideas you're presenting relate to one another. And so transitions occur not only within paragraphs, so are the individual sentences connected with each other, but is there a central idea for each paragraph? And then within paragraphs, do the paragraphs connect with each other? Are they related to one another? Or is, this paragraph about something totally separate than the next paragraph and unrelated? A key to transitions is use transitional phrases. The phrases that you can look up online. Just look up transitional phrases. Therefore, because of, in consequence of, in contrast to. Use transitional words and phrases because they will help you. They help you see for yourself, and they help the reader see, what you're trying to do, how the ideas are flowing together. So do the ideas consistently refer back to the thesis? Again, this is why the thesis is critical. Are you offering evidence? If you're offering evidence, offer a single specific piece of evidence in one paragraph, and if you have another piece of evidence, develop that in the second paragraph. If you're making an argument, and in one paragraph, do that, and then you're offering evidence for this argument in the next paragraph, do that. If you're making an objection, do that in one paragraph, and then give your rebuttal in the next. But make it clear to the reader that you're offering evidence, or you're making an argument, or you're offering an objection, or you're giving a rebuttal. Each paragraph should have a central idea that was being developed. I've kind of already spoken about that. And a good way to check this is after you read your essay, could you write in the margins, or when you're taking notes on your video essay, could you write down after each paragraph, what is the single specific idea that I'm trying to articulate? And then you can ask yourself as well, does it relate to the thesis? Okay, the author proposed an objection and rebuttal, and I'm going to speak more about this momentarily. But essentially, it's not enough to simply offer one. Is it clear that you've offered one? And if you have, that's great, and you can get a high mark here. If not, you'll struggle. Okay, citations. This is the third major component of creating a good argument. Citations, let me be very clear about this, are not paraphrasing. If you simply paraphrase and that's all you do in your essay, you're going to get a 0 for this component of your essay. You are not going to get any credit. You need to cite. You need to take directly from a different source and include that within your argument. And that's true whether you're writing something or whether you're doing a video. If you're doing a video, you could just, you could write it down beforehand and, read it verbatim, or you could pull up your text and say, based on John Mazzoni or based on whichever author you're using, they say this in this paragraph. Okay, so how is this grade broken down? Well, I am going to give you some credit if you get 3 sources, 3 citations, regardless of where they come from. Whether they come from in class or outside sources. It could be the internet, that's fine. I don't care where you quote from. But if you have 3 quotes, you'll get 25 points for this. But then you also, if you want full credit for the citation section, have to have 3 quotes directly from the class material that we're using. And that could be class texts, that could be class videos, or that could be the reading packet. That would not include emails, that would not include notes from lectures. You could use that, and those would count for just kind of 3 general quotes. But if you want full credit, the second component of the citations grade asks you to have 3 quotes directly from class material. The reason I do that is because it shows that you're able to converse, you're able to interact with the material that you're supposed to be reading and the material that you're supposed to be watching. And so that's what you got to do. Okay, were the quotes relevant to the argument? Don't assume they're relevant. Show the reader why they are relevant, or the viewer why they're relevant. Don't simply include a quote, explain it. And again, this goes back to a strong thesis statement. If your quote has nothing to do with the thesis statement, get rid of it. It doesn't matter for this essay. But if your quote is relevant, then use it. It could be relevant in terms of offering evidence for your thesis. It could be relevant in terms of proposing an objection. It could be relevant in terms of your rebuttal. But make sure you're not only offering a quote, but then you explain it. You show the reader or the viewer exactly why this quote is relevant. And then finally, did the author quote properly? Let me be very clear. I'm not a stickler about particular styles, whether Chicago Manual or APA. What I do care about is that it's clear that you're quoting. So do you have quotation marks at both the beginning and the end of the quote? Are you showing the reader or the viewer where the quote is coming from? It's just the author, the name of the text or the video, and the page number, or in the case of the video, approximately what point of the video, what time in the video you're pulling from. You do that, you're all good. And again, paraphrasing is not quoting. The fourth component of creating a good argument is objections and rebuttals. So an objection and rebuttal is an area where students often struggle. It can be an area where they really have a hard time mastering. But it's so critical to making a good argument. Because if you just simply state your view, but don't offer the other opposing side, the reader's not going to be as convinced. I might say, hey, that's a great point that you made, but what about this point? What about someone who disagrees with you? And we'll start with the objection. The objection is someone who disagrees with you. The objection is coming from the perspective of someone who wants to see your argument fail. You might think about it in terms of someone who hates you. Imagine someone who hates you and then write or speak from that perspective. The objection, again, to be very, very clear, is the statement or the point of view, the idea that disagrees with the thesis that you're trying to make. It disagrees with your purpose, your aim, or your goal. Okay, so the way I often explain this is in terms of a sports analogy. So think about a sport, any kind of sport. You got your ball, you got your puck, you got whatever instrument you're using. You're trying to score. You're on offense. That's you giving evidence or making an argument for your thesis. That's you trying to prove your point. The objection is kind of like the defense. The defense wants to stop you. The defense does not want you to score. And if you apply the metaphor to writing or to speaking, the objection is the defense trying to stop you from making your point. Is trying to, again, prove that your thesis is wrong. And so you do that, and it's not simply enough to say, okay, here's an idea as to why my argument might be wrong, but really go into depth. Write a full paragraph, a full separate paragraph devoted just to the perspective of someone who disagrees with you. You do that, and don't offer 5 or 6 objections, 5 or 6 reasons why your argument might be wrong. Offer one, develop it fully. Put yourself in the perspective of this person that disagrees with you. Write from the perspective of someone that disagrees with you when you're making the objection. Then you've got your rebuttal. And to go back to the sports analogy, the rebuttal is you trying to counteract the defense. It's you trying to counterattack it. The defense does one thing, then you do something different. And when you make a rebuttal, you're essentially saying, okay, here's why my argument is right despite the objection. And for a good rebuttal, it's not simply to kind of give evidence for your argument or not to return to a previous point. It's saying, here's why the objection is wrong, and I'm still right. So the rebuttal has to be directly related to the objection. And the objection should be directly related to the thesis. And as with the objection, it's not simply enough to state a rebuttal, to say, here's why I'm right. You've really got to go into detail. You've really got to show the reader or the viewer why you're right. A separate, full 5 to 6 sentence rebuttal is necessary. And don't make it part of the conclusion. Make it a rebuttal. Make it separate. Okay, so then we move on to accuracy of interpretation and length, the remaining major components of your grade. Accuracy of interpretation. It is possible to make a good structural argument, but be completely off on the theory. So you could make a good structural argument by having a clear thesis, by offering evidence, by using quotes, by offering an objection rebuttal, but by the same time getting it totally wrong, getting the idea totally wrong. So if you do this, you'll lose points on this component, but if you've created a strong, structurally strong argument, you'll still get a decent overall grade. So that's what that is there for. Length. This one, I feel bad when students don't get full credit here because you should. When you're writing, it's the standard fonts, it's the standard 1-inch margins. Don't take up half or a quarter of a page with your header. That won't count. Just a small little header, 2 full, double-spaced 1-inch margin for criteria for the length. And if you're doing a video, at least 6 to 7 minutes long. You can go longer for the page requirements. You could go up to 3. If you go beyond that, you're probably getting off track, and that could hurt you. But make sure you're at least 2. And if you are doing these other components of the argument, if you have an argument, a thesis, you offer evidence for it, you have 3 quotes and you explain them, you offer a full objection, you offer a full rebuttal, it's almost going to be impossible not to get to 2 pages or get to 6 to 7 minutes. So if you're doing structurally what you need to do, you should be very good here. Okay, so this goes into, those are averaged out, and that is comes to your final grade. But then you can lose or gain points on the final grade based on creativity. Did you go beyond the superficial? Did you go beyond the obvious? If you have, you can never lose points for this component, but you could gain between 1 to 3 points. Then phrasing and grammar. Okay, so here, for the phrasing and grammar, you could gain or lose points based on the idea that phrasing and grammar matters. If you're writing or you're speaking in such a way that it's not clear what you're trying to do, then no matter how good your idea might be, it's not communicated. You don't have a good idea if the reader or viewer can't understand it. And so that's one component, one way in which you would lose points on phrasing and grammar. You could also lose points if you're consistently sloppy. It's not necessarily that I can't understand what you're doing, but, there's a lot of misspellings, there's a lot of mispronunciations, there's a lot of grammatical mistakes, because that could show sloppiness. We all make mistakes when we speak. We all make mistakes in terms of writing, grammar, and spelling. I'm not going to crucify you for that. But certainly if you're making mistakes consistently, it demonstrates, it communicates to the reader that you're sloppy, that you're not checking, that you're not proofreading your stuff. And certainly, if you hand in a sloppy, grammatically incorrect, lots of misspelled words to your employer, they are going to think poorly of you. There's no question about that. So again, you can lose points either because your grammar or phrasing distorts your idea, it's not clear what you're trying to do, or because it communicates sloppiness, or both. And you can also gain points. If you really have written well, you communicate your ideas very clearly, you articulate them beautifully, there you'll get some extra points. Late, you lose 10 points for each week your assignment is late. If you're late, get it in. It is much better to get in a late assignment than to get nothing in, but that's the idea. Each week you're late, you lose 10 points. Plagiarism. Plagiarism is, for me, the cardinal sin when it comes to making an argument. Plagiarism essentially is theft. Plagiarism occurs when you use someone else's words and you pass them off as your own. Plagiarism occurs when it's not clear, and this is an easy way to check. If you can't tell when you reread your argument or you watch your video if it's coming from you or somebody else, that's plagiarism. And you may know in your head this is the thoughts of someone else or the words of someone else, but if it's not clear that it's coming from another source, then you're plagiarizing, and you have committed a really serious sin. And the policy for plagiarism is first time you have to redo your assignment, second time you fail the assignment, third time you fail the course. And that is the deal. So that's creating arguments. I hope this was helpful. I know it's a long video, but we're going to be working on it throughout the course. And if you ever have confusions or you're not clear about a particular element of the rubric, this is written down in your reading packet, but you could also come back and refer to this video.